So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about the case of Joanna Yeates. Quickly before I get into it, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So Joanna Claire Yeates was a 25-year-old woman born on April 19th, 1985 in Hampshire in England. Her parents, David and Teresa, gave Joanna everything they possibly could as she was growing up to give the best possible upbringing. She was put through private school her whole life and then she eventually graduated university with a degree in landscape architecture. Soon after graduating, Joanna quickly got a job within that field, within landscape architecture, and it was there at that place she worked that she met 25-year-old Greg Reardon. And Joanna and Greg met at work, they got along, they realised they had a lot in common, they started spending time together outside of work and eventually became a couple. Joanna and Greg seemed so happy together and Joanna's parents were convinced that this was it for Jo, like she'd found the person that she was going to grow old with. And in general, Joanna was a very positive, very bubbly, very outgoing, lively person. She was the life of every party. She was very popular among her co-workers. And she was known to be very caring, very sensitive, very nurturing, especially towards her mother. And her mother, Teresa, described her relationship with Jo less like a mother and a daughter, but more just like best friends. They used to do everything together. She described Jo as very spontaneous, very adventurous, very just not afraid to put herself out there. She had a real lust for life and she said her daughter really inspired her to be the same. In 2009-2010 kind of time, this architectural firm that Joanna and Greg worked for decided to relocate to Bristol, and Joanna and Greg loved their jobs and they didn't want to give them up. And the two of them were at a point in their relationship where they were gonna move in together eventually anyway, so why not follow their job to Bristol and get a place together in Bristol and move in together. And that's exactly what they did. And Jo's parents remember Jo being so excited about the whole thing, about living in a new city, about having her own space. She was so excited about buying all this new furniture and decorations for the flat and just taking the next step in her relationship. So this flat was in a huge building, but they were on the ground floor and they had kind of like an outside door, so they never had to go in this building. They would just walk around the side of the building and they had a door there, so it was like they just had a house pretty much. So the two of them, Jo and Greg, stayed working for this architectural firm that they both met at for a while. And then Jo got an offer from a different architectural firm and she decided to take that, and so she moved jobs. Now this case takes place in December of 2010, so it's Christmas time. There was a lot of snow on this particular year, so throughout this whole case there's a lot of snow on the ground. That seems like a weird fact, but it'll of course come in later. And with it being Christmas time, it's really, really busy. There's a lot of parties, a lot of meetings, a lot of seeing family members, just tying up loose ends before Christmas. And on this particular day, December 17th, 2010, Greg Reardon was going to go to Sheffield for the weekend because that's where his family originally was from, that's where they all were. So he was going to Sheffield for the weekend just to see them all before Christmas, and then he would come back and spend Christmas with Jo. So Greg sets off to Sheffield and Joanna has work as normal, and her co-workers remember her expressing that she was a little bit anxious about the weekend. This was the first weekend without Greg, the first weekend in Bristol alone, her first full weekend in this flat alone, and it's not like she was scared, but she was just a little bit, you know, like off about spending the whole weekend by herself. But her co-workers reassured her and they were like, look, do you want to go out for a drink tonight and just kind of spend the evening with us? Maybe that'll make you feel better. And they did. So they went straight from work to a pub, and as always, Joanna was the life of the party and she was there for a few hours, speaking, having fun with her friends, and then she decided to set off home. She said her goodbyes and then walked out of the pub and set off to walk home. Meanwhile, Greg Reardon has arrived in Sheffield, he's with his family and everything, and he texted his girlfriend Joanna, just letting her know that he'd arrived there safe, just asking how her day's been, everything. but he didn't receive a reply. And he just kind of assumed that Jo was busy, or her phone was out of charge, maybe she'd already gone to bed, who knows. And so he didn't think much of it. He went to bed and woke up the next morning, but she still hadn't replied. So he rang her again that morning, and again, she didn't pick up, but he just kind of assumed maybe she was still asleep, maybe she'd left her phone at work, maybe that's why she wasn't responding, because this wasn't like her. And so he kept trying her at regular intervals throughout the whole weekend, but she wasn't responding to a single text, a single call, a single voicemail. And Joanna was normally pretty good at keeping up with her phone, especially when she's by herself for the weekend and she's nervous. And so Greg was obviously rather concerned, but at the same time, Joanna is a grown woman. If she doesn't want to answer her phone, if she wants to just put it away for the weekend, she can. But when Greg returned home after his weekend away in Sheffield, he came back to the flat and the flat door was unlocked. And he walked inside, but no one was in there. Joanna wasn't home. And so he started to panic at this point, and so he got out his phone and decided to call her one last time before he started running around trying to find her, calling everyone they knew. And so he tried her phone one last time, but then he heard it ringing in the flat. So he followed the noise and followed it all the way to her coat hanging up. Her phone was in her coat pocket, hanging up in the flat, but Joanna wasn't there. And then when he looked inside the other coat pockets, he found that her keys, her purse, all her belongings that she would normally take out with her on a daily basis were in this coat. And that really worried Greg, because Joanna, like most people, wouldn't go out without those kind of things. And so he called her parents and just said, "Have you heard from her? Have you seen her? Is she there with you?" And her parents said no, they hadn't heard from her all weekend either. All three of them, Greg, Joanna's mother and her father, all decided then and there on the phone that something was wrong. This was not in Joanna's character at all. She'd never done anything like this before. And so when that phone call ended, Greg called the police and reported his girlfriend as missing, and her mother and father got in the car in the middle of the night and drove to Bristol. So police arrived, Joanna's parents arrived, and police were speaking with Greg as Joanna's parents were kind of looking around the flat for anything, for any sign that Joanna had been there. And that was when her mother found a receipt for an oven pizza from Tesco. And this pizza was bought at 20 to 9 p.m. on the night that Joanna was last seen. So the immediate theory was that Joanna had returned home safely on Friday evening and probably gone missing since then. However, as they all continued looking around this flat, looking for any more evidence that she'd been back, none of them found any evidence of this pizza. It wasn't in the fridge, there wasn't leftovers, there wasn't the box in the bin, there wasn't even a dirty tray or anything like that. And it wasn't like she'd eaten it and then put the box in the bin and then emptied the bin because the bin hadn't been emptied. Police didn't quite know what that meant, but something isn't right about that, is it? The fact that Joanna made it home, all her belongings made it home, but the pizza that she bought that night wasn't there. So Greg and the police stayed at the flat and continued searching while Joanna's parents went out just looking for her. They were looking for anything, any sign of Joanna, any of her clothes, maybe even this pizza box. Joanna's mother was banging on car doors and on car boots just in case her daughter had been abducted and locked in a car. That's how desperate and worried everyone was straight away. And when Joanna's parents returned back to Jo's flat, they noticed two sets of footprints in the snow on the grass outside. So they kind of stood there looking at them for a while, analysing them, thinking whose they could be. And that was when they looked up and saw two figures walking back over these footprints. So they just assumed they were the people that made them in the first place, everything was fine. And so they walked back to Jo's flat. But as they were walking back to the flat, these two figures were going the same way. They were following them back in the direction of Jo's flat. And so when her parents got back to the door, they decided to stay there for a while. They didn't want to go in. They wanted to know who these two people were. And that was when these two figures, well, one of the two, approached them. It was a man and a woman, and it turned out to be Jo's neighbours, literally next door neighbours. They were another outdoor flat, literally next to Jo's. It was a couple named Vincent Tabak and his girlfriend Tanya. and Vincent stayed back as Tanya came and spoke to Joe's parents. She just kind of asked what was going on because obviously there were police cars there and everything, and Joe's parents told her a very brief summary of the situation, and Tanya seemed very concerned, and she said, well, if you need me, I'm here, if you need any help. Meanwhile, police back at the station were kind of assessing the situation, assessing how serious it was, and they quickly came to the conclusion that it was very unlikely that Joanna had left of her own accord that night. Like I said, she'd never done anything like this before. She was generally happy in her life, with her job, with her boyfriend, with her new house. She didn't have any history of like mental health issues, depression, anything like that that might make her want to escape or run away. And besides, she'd left all of her belongings at home, all her money and everything, so even if she was to run away, she couldn't afford to get anywhere or stay anywhere. And she'd even made plans on the last day that she was seen to meet up with one of her friends on Christmas Eve. And if you're planning on running away or planning on going missing, you probably wouldn't make plans like that. It just seemed like whatever did happen to Joanna Yeates that night, it wasn't voluntary. She didn't leave of her own accord. And something to note is that there didn't seem to be any signs of forced entry. No kind of smashed windows. The flat was nice and clean and tidy. It wasn't ransacked. It didn't seem like it was a robbery gone wrong. So it was likely that if Joanna was abducted, she probably knew her abductor well enough to let them in, or for them to let themselves in. However, still at this point it was very, very early and police couldn't be certain of the abduction theory, even though it did seem rather likely. They've got to look into every single possibility. And so everyone was making posters and social media posts, and police and her parents and Greg were all doing TV appeals. And all of this was going on as police back at the station were trying to establish Joe's last known movements. So police spoke with her co-workers, who confirmed that she did go to work that day and that they all went to the pub afterwards. However, they said that she walked home alone and none of them had heard from her since. So that was the last confirmed sighting of Joanna Yeates, the last time anyone ever saw her in person. And so police thought that their best bet of being able to track Joanna's movements after the pub was through CCTV footage. So they got footage from the pub, it was confirmed that she was in there, and then they got the footage from the outside of the pub catching her leaving. And police had to collect hundreds of hours of CCTV footage because it was only like on the outside of buildings, and she will have only been on each camera for a few seconds as she was walking past each shop. So police had to go around every single shop on her route home, her whole route home, and ask for the CCTV footage from that night. And they successfully managed to follow Joanna through CCTV for most of her route home. So she sets off walking outside of the pub and she goes into a Waitrose. However, she doesn't buy anything in there and then she leaves shortly after. She then goes to like a corner shop, like a bargain booze type thing, and buys 2 bottles of cider. And once she leaves there at about 8:30, 20 to 9 o'clock-ish, she enters a Tesco and buys an oven pizza. And obviously, police recovered the receipt for that from her flat. And then after she leaves Tesco, she sets off back in the direction of her flat, but somewhere between Tesco and her flat, they lose her on CCTV. Obviously, in more kind of like housey areas, they don't have as much CCTV because businesses only have it to kind of protect themselves. Houses don't have CCTV on the front like businesses do, so as she started walking along different streets, they managed to lose her. However, they do think that she returned home safely that night because her coat was there, everything was there. And those 2 bottles of cider that she bought on her way home, police didn't think much of them when they were searching the flat because obviously they could have been there from whenever. So when they returned to the flat, they found that the bottles of cider were still there, but one of them was partially consumed. So whether that was by Joanna or the same person that took the pizza, police didn't know. So police continued to ask around like Joanna's friends and family, co-workers, everyone, if Joanna had anyone that might benefit from her going missing. However, everyone that knew her said that she didn't have any enemies or anything like that. She was just a nice person. Police also decided to speak to all of her neighbours in this big building, including that couple that spoke with Joe's parents that night, Vincent Tabak and his girlfriend Tanya. And just like before, Tanya was the more kind of hands-on, cooperative, helpful kind of person. She was speaking with police, and again, Vincent was more standoffish. I'm not sure if that's the right word to use, but he was just a little bit quieter, and maybe that was probably just because Tanya was constantly talking, he couldn't get a word in. Tanya told police that on the night that Joanna was last seen, the night that she was presumed to have gone missing, she was actually out of town and she was at a Christmas party, a work Christmas party in a different city. However, Vincent Tabak was home alone that night and he was going to come and pick Tanya up from this party wherever she was late at night, so he was just at home waiting. However, Vincent told police that he didn't see or hear anything weird that night, and he'd never actually met Joanna before, so he didn't really know what he was looking for. Police did a quick routine search of their apartment and every other apartment in the building just to double check that nothing was there, and nothing was there. There was nothing of interest in any of the apartments. Although the case took a turn for the worst 8 days later on Christmas Day of 2010, when a couple was out walking their dog on Christmas morning. They were walking down a quiet little path named Longwood Lane, and there was snow everywhere, like I said, and it was quite built up at this point, so there were loads of different mounds of it. And this couple walked all the way along this street, didn't think twice about any of these kind of mounds of snow. However, when they were walking back to go home, they spotted something sticking out of one of these mounds of snow. They thought it looked like blue denim jeans or something, and they knew that a woman had gone missing in the area, and immediately they felt like something was wrong, and so they called police. So police came down and brushed away the snow, and there they found a human body. A female human body. And of course, like I said, Joanna was the only missing woman in the area at the time, and where this body was found was just 3 miles away from her flat. And so before she was even fully identified, police felt like it was very, very likely that this was her. And so they called Joanna's parents to come down to the police station, and on Christmas morning of 2010, the body was identified as that of Joanna Yeates. And Joanna's family described feeling at that point a kind of sense of relief. Obviously it was very painful news for them to hear, but by that point it had been over a week since she was last seen. They said it was nice just to be able to put her to rest rather than living their whole lives not knowing where she was or what happened to their daughter. So now the investigation stepped up from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. And police reappealed all over again because now a lot of information had changed in the case, and they were receiving hundreds of phone calls. Police were working 24/7 to try and chase every single lead that was coming in. They had to watch hundreds of hours of CCTV footage. They had to search through over 293 tons of rubbish from the area, so like people's bins and things like that, just in case they discarded any information, tried to get rid of any evidence. Crime Stoppers offered a £10,000 reward for anyone that could bring any information that led to a conviction of Joanna's killer. And then the Sun newspaper later upped that amount to £50,000. But not only that, police were appealing on TV for people to lock their doors at night and to walk home in groups, never to walk alone in the dark. And that was because they feared that whoever had done this to Joanna might strike again, because they didn't seem to have a reason to do this. So Joanna's body was taken for autopsy and her cause of death was found to be strangulation. However, she didn't have very deep, dark marks on her neck as someone that had been strangled might usually have. And this means that Joanna suffered a very slow and painful death. Whoever was doing this to her tightened their hands gradually, really slowly, instead of just killing her instantly. There didn't seem to be any sign of sexual assault on Joanna's body, and her body was found fully clothed, so we can assume that this wasn't a sexually motivated attack. It might have had sexual themes to it, like it was probably a man going after a woman. However, they didn't do anything sexual to Joanna's body. And an interesting thing that came out of this whole autopsy was that Joanna didn't ingest any of that pizza. So she bought the pizza, she took it back to her house, and then it went missing and she didn't eat it. It wasn't in her stomach. It was pretty hard to tell exactly when Joanna was killed because obviously she'd been missing for 8 days, so it could have been anywhere within that 8 days. And because it was snowing outside and it was so cold, her body was almost perfectly preserved. There was barely any decomposition because decomposition is very, very slow in cold temperatures. However, from certain things that only a really skilled pathologist would know, they could tell that she was probably killed on the night that she was last seen, December 17th. So police also assumed from these 2 pieces of information that there was no pizza in her stomach and that she was probably killed on the night that she was last seen. They assumed that her killer had taken that pizza from her flat for whatever reason. And so it was very unlikely that they were going to be able to find it at this point because it had been 8 days. So like I said, the investigation stepped up from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. So everyone that had already been questioned in relation to this case had to be re-questioned. Obviously there's different questions that you ask people when someone is missing versus when a body has been found. So literally everyone, Greg, her parents, all her friends, co-workers, everyone that was living in that building, everyone was re-questioned. And a few neighbours, not from her building but from the roads around where she lived, a few of them said that they might have heard things. One of them thought they might have heard 2 separate screams on the night that she went missing, and another person thought they heard someone shout, "Help me." Although neither of these neighbours could pinpoint what time they heard these, and it was a Friday night. And like I say, in cases like these, it could easily be someone drunk. It was around the Christmas period, everyone's going to Christmas parties, people are walking home drunk. So it could have just been a loud drunk person. And also at this point it was 8 days after that night, and I don't know about you guys, but I can't remember sounds that I heard 8 days ago. You know, if someone was to come and knock on my door and say, "Did you hear anything on this day?" I'd be like, "I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you." So that's not me trying to downplay these people's kind of witness testimonies. Is it a witness testimony? But at the same time, we can't be too sure that those are accurate. Along with the re-questionings, a lot of re-appeals were made because obviously everything had changed in the case. So there was a new poster made and her parents went back on TV with police to re-appeal for anyone that might know who did this. One thing that police really pushed in these re-appeals was, like I said, Joanna was found fully clothed. However, this was without one sock. She was wearing grey kind of knee-high ski socks and one of them was missing, and so they really pushed that in the re-appeals. They were scared that the killer had probably taken it back with them, like maybe as some kind of sick trophy, or maybe they didn't realise they had it on them, maybe it was in their pocket or something and then they discarded it on their way home and that might lead them elsewhere. So they were just really pushing people to look for this sock. So yeah, her body was found fully clothed without the sock and without shoes. However, Greg confirmed that the shoes that she was wearing that morning when she left for work were in the apartment, so it's not believed that her body was even taken there with shoes on. Again, that also suggests that she was probably killed in her own apartment and her body was taken out because she wasn't wearing shoes. So it's not like she was on a walk or even outside the apartment, even taking the bins out or something because she wasn't wearing shoes. I keep stressing the fact that Jo was probably killed in her own apartment and she probably let in her abductor or her killer because there was no signs of forced entry, no smashed windows, no sign of a struggle in the whole flat. So the 2 explanations there were that either the killer was let in by Jo, so she knew them, or the killer had their own keys to the flat. Naturally, police looked straight to Greg Reardon, Joanna's boyfriend, as they do in cases like these, because unfortunately it is quite a common explanation for cases like this that it was like a domestic dispute and a domestic murder. He had a key to the flat, he knew exactly where she was going to be that night, and if he was inside the flat, she wouldn't scream or anything like that. She wouldn't raise any alarms. So police seized a lot of Greg's possessions, his computer, his phone, things like that, so that they could look through search histories and everything. but they found absolutely nothing. And they were satisfied from speaking to Greg's family that he was probably on his way, if not already in Sheffield, at the point when Joanna was killed. So he was ruled out pretty quickly. The only other person, other than Joe and Greg, that had a key to that flat was their landlord, Christopher Jefferies, who also happened to live in the same building. Jefferies was a 65-year-old retired college teacher, and he was known as, for lack of a better word, weird, eccentric, but also just kind of not creepy, but he made people feel uncomfortable unintentionally. He generally kept to himself in his own little apartment upstairs. However, when he would speak to people like tenants and people in shops and things, they would come away from the interaction feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I think he just wasn't very good at social interaction, and so he was immediately a little bit of a person of interest. He was very freshly retired, like he'd only just retired from being a college teacher, and so he wasn't doing much of anything, but he had a couple of properties that he owned, and he kind of managed them and rented them out and things. He owned his own property that he lived in, and then two others in that same building, Joe and Greg's, obviously, and Vincent Tabak's and his girlfriend Tanya that lived next door. And that's just how Christopher Jefferies spent his days, just in his own flat, managing the other ones, talking to his tenants, just reading books, watching old VHS tapes. Like, I don't think he had many friends or family or anything, anyone that he saw on the regular anywhere. I don't even think he had like a TV in his apartment. He just had like a little monitor that he would watch VHS tapes on, he would listen to records, he would read. He just kind of lived in his own little world up in that flat. So police went to speak with him, and they found that the only alibi that Christopher Jefferies could give about where he was and what he was doing on the night that Joanna was killed was that he was in his flat alone reading books. So he was in the same building as Joanna when she was killed. He was alone, so no one could confirm his story, and he didn't hear or see anything. Greg also confirmed with police that he'd actually spoken to Christopher Jefferies on the morning that he left for Sheffield, so on the morning that Joe would eventually be killed. And Greg just mentioned to Christopher Jefferies, just in passing, that he was going to Sheffield for the weekend to see his family before Christmas. And so that means that Jefferies knew that Joanna would be alone in the flat all weekend. So at this point in the case, the media somehow got wind of the fact that police were looking into Christopher Jefferies as a potential suspect. At the time, he was just a person of interest. And this man was absolutely hounded by reporters. Of course, they knew where he lived, so they were outside that building every morning until night. They were there pretty much 24/7. They would follow him to and from his car, to and from shops, to and from the building. They would not leave him alone. Cameras, microphones, at least like 5 people there at a time shouting at him, asking for questions, even calling him homophobic slurs. And you'll hear a bit later on in this case about just how bad the media were with Christopher Jefferies, but they'd already branded him as guilty, and he wasn't even a suspect. They were putting him on the front of newspapers saying that he was a sexual predator and that he was this and that and that he was a danger to the public, but he hadn't even been arrested. And you'll see a little bit later on just how bad the media were with Christopher Jefferies. They had already branded this man as guilty because he was an easy target. He was an old man, he seemed very weird, he kept to himself up in his flat, he did nothing all day, and when he would talk to the reporters and they would get him talking on camera and put it on the news, everything he was saying just came off rather sarcastic or ingenuine. And that's not because he was trying to be that way, that's just how he spoke. And obviously no one knew Christopher Jefferies, so no one knew that. No one knew that's just how he is as a person. And because of all of this, because he had a key to the flat, he was acting very strange, he had a very weak alibi, police decided that they had grounds to arrest this man. And so on December 30th, 2010, police went to his flat at 7 a.m. and arrested Christopher Jefferies on suspicion of the murder of Joanna. So Jefferies was taken to the police station while other officers began searching his flat, and they kind of seized different things, but like I said, he didn't have any electronics, no computer, no phone or anything, so they were just kind of looking at his books and pieces of clothing and things. They were just hoping that they might find anything. And it was in the news within the hour that he was arrested. It was being reported everywhere that police had their first suspect in the case. Meanwhile, all this was going on in England. Vincent, Tabak and Tanya, Joe and Greg's neighbours, were actually in Holland because that is where Vincent was originally from, and they were over there for the new year. And Vincent Tabak was keeping up with the news. Obviously his neighbour had just been found murdered in her own apartment, which was right next door to his. So he was constantly updating these news sites while they were away in Holland. And as soon as he read that Christopher Jefferies had been arrested in connection with her murder, this sparked a memory in Vincent's head, and he rang the police back in Bristol straight away. Vincent Tabak told police that he recalled looking out of the window on the night of Joanna's disappearance and just seeing Christopher Jefferies' car in its normal car parking spot, as it always was. And then he went about his business a little bit, and then he went back to the window and looked out again later on in the night, and Christopher Jefferies' car had turned around, so like it had been out, and then he just parked it again the opposite way around. And Vincent didn't think much of it. He just thought his landlord had been out at the time, but now he knew he was potentially connected to the case. Vincent thought it was important to let police know. So of course this did not look good. It looked as if Christopher Jefferies probably put Joanna's body in his car, took it out and dumped it, and then brought his car back. And so police also seized Christopher Jefferies' car, and they began doing like forensic tests in there, looking for any sign of Joanna, DNA, hair, blood, anything. But they found absolutely nothing. And that was a running theme with Christopher Jefferies. No matter how hard police tried to find evidence against him, they just couldn't find any physical evidence. So 48 hours had passed since Christopher Jefferies was originally arrested, and in the UK there is a law that police can only hold a person of interest or a suspect for 24 hours, and if at the end of that 24 hours they can't charge them with anything, if they don't have sufficient evidence to say that they are guilty, then they have to let them go. Or if it seems likely that they might find evidence, but they just need a little bit more time, they can appeal for an extra 24 hours, which gives them a full extra day to go and find some evidence against Christopher Jefferies. And that is exactly what they did. And the courts granted them an extra day to keep him in police custody. And at this point, police were getting pretty desperate, obviously, because they needed to get this evidence within this 24 hours. And so they decided to take a different route to try and say that Christopher Jefferies was guilty. They looked at Joanna's murder and said, whoever did this did it very, very well. There was no sign of a struggle, there was no DNA anywhere, no one heard anything, no one saw anything. So whoever had done this, they'd done it so well that it almost seemed as though they'd done it before. And so police feared that if it was Jefferies, he might have had other victims. 3 unsolved disappearances stood out to police in particular. The first of which was the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence, and I've done a full video on that, which I'll link up there. But basically she was a young woman around Joe's age, she was attractive, and she went missing when she was alone in her own home. Very much like Joanna. The second similar case happened back in 1974, so a long time before Joanna's. However, it was in the same area, and because it was so long before, that would have meant that Christopher Jefferies was around 30 years old. He was a lot younger, a lot more agile, because right at this time, he was quite a frail old man. But yeah, this second case was a woman named Glenys Crothers that left a party late at night and was strangled to death. Very much like Joanna. And the third similar case was the disappearance of a woman named Melanie Hall in 1996. And that one took place in Bath, which is a little bit away from Bristol, but still relatively close. Once again, she was an attractive woman around Joe's age, and she went on a night out with her boyfriend, and her and her boyfriend fell out during this night out, and he went home alone and left her at the club. And she was last seen at the club. She's never been seen since. So police tried their best to connect Christopher Jefferies to one of these 3 cases so that they could say that it was very similar to Joe's. However, Just like with Joanna's case, they couldn't find any evidence. And because of this, after the extended 24 hours, police still had no evidence to charge Christopher Jefferies with her murder, and so they just had to let him go. And I just want to mention one little thing about the police work in this case. While Christopher Jefferies was being held in custody, being questioned and interrogated and everything, police were kind of making him confess to this, even though he was innocent. Well, they were trying to make him confess to it, but Christopher Jefferies was not going to confess to something that he hadn't done. And the ethics of that are horrendous, because imagine kind of a mentally unstable, anxious person going into police custody and being told over and over again, you're guilty, just admit it, you're guilty, you're guilty. That person might then start to think that they are guilty, or they might even just confess to it just to get the kind of interrogation to stop. We learnt about that in GCSE psychology. And this is a quote from Christopher Jefferies himself. At the time, it felt as if the police were deliberately playing a game, promising that the ordeal would soon be over and then finding it necessary to prolong the wait. It was a form of psychological torture. At such times, the mind plays tricks and one starts to believe that perhaps one is criminal without knowing it. So he just basically said what I said, but in more posh words. Like, the police will tell you over and over again, like, you're gonna go down for this, like, you're guilty, like, you might as well just confess. And someone might start thinking that they are a criminal and that they might as well just confess. I just thought it was something important to mention because of how Christopher Jefferies was treated during this case, both by the media and by police. Police are supposed to be objective at all times. In the media, he was portrayed as this kind of sexual predator, college teacher that creeped out all of his students, and like, the media turned the whole of Bristol against this man, all because he was an easy target. He was a 65-year-old, frail, eccentric old man with like long white hair that never left his flat, and he seemed like such a character, and so everyone just assumed he was guilty, and the media played into that just because they wanted stories. They didn't care how it would affect this man or the rest of his life, but when have the UK tabloids ever cared what is true or not? They just print what they want to print and don't care who it affects. Anyway, Christopher Jefferies was released from police custody, although police weren't convinced that he was innocent. They were still trying to find evidence to re-arrest him and actually charge him, but also because they hadn't found anything for 72 hours, they decided to look into other possibilities as well, other people. And so they started thinking, like, who else could have done this? Like, who seems a little bit suspicious in this investigation? And that is when they remembered Vincent Tabak. Vincent only remembered he'd seen that car change directions once he knew that Christopher Jefferies was arrested. Why hadn't he remembered it in the 2 weeks before that? It was almost as if he was trying to pin false evidence on someone else to frame them. So the police force in Bristol sent an officer all the way to Holland to go and question Vincent Tabak. And as part of this questioning, as with any other person of interest in an investigation like this, they asked to take a DNA sample. It's standard procedure. It's just a quick swab of the inside of your cheek just to get some skin cells so then they can test it against like DNA evidence. However, Vincent was very reluctant to give a DNA sample. So reluctant, in fact, that that officer in Holland phoned the police back in Bristol to let them know how reluctant he was being, because it was bordering on very suspicious. He was also very interested in the forensic work going on in the investigation, like when they started it, what they were testing, how long they'd been testing things for. Anyway, he did eventually give that DNA sample and it was sent and tested against everything that they'd found at the crime scene. But before we carry on with the information on him, I just want to give you a little bit of a background on Vincent Tabak. Like I said, he was full Dutch. He was born in the Netherlands in 1978 and he was raised there until he eventually moved to England when he was like an adult in 2007. He was known back at home in Holland as very shy, very introverted, very to himself. He didn't have many friends growing up. He was a little bit of a loner. He would spend a lot of time on his computer and in his bedroom. It's not like he didn't have any friends or he couldn't make friends. He just kind of chose not to. He just preferred being by himself in his bedroom. But he was very, very, very intelligent. He went to university and graduated, I don't know with what kind of degree, some form of engineering degree. Shortly after he moved to the UK, I believe he originally moved to Bath, which is not too far from Bristol, where he ended up next to Joanna. And while he was living in Bath, shortly after he arrived and got settled and everything, he met his girlfriend Tanya on a dating website. He had a promising career in this very specific type of engineering that I don't really understand, but I'm going to try and explain it. But basically this very specific type of engineering was in very high demand in the UK. So Holland had pretty much mastered it and everything. However, the UK was paying good money for people to come over and help them with this specific thing. And so that's why Vincent ended up moving to the UK to kind of pursue a career in this. So he was a people flow analyst, and he basically examined and analysed the way that people move around in public spaces. So like airports and sports stadiums, supermarkets and things, he kind of analyses it and optimises the space. So if in like a shopping centre a certain area gets congested over and over again every single day, they know to make that bit wider. And Vincent was the person that kind of analysed how people behaved and moved around these places. Does that make sense? Yeah, not to me either. Although something to note about Vincent Tabak is that he is described very differently by the different people that know him from different places. So at home, like I said, to like his friends and family, he was known as very shy, very introverted. However, to his work friends in the UK, he was known as very outgoing, very fiery almost. He was just a very dynamic person. He would put on different masks for different people. Like I said right at the beginning of the video, kind of, Vincent and Joanna had never actually met before. In the whole 2 months that Joanna was living next door to him, they'd just never crossed paths. But anyway, back to the timeline. Police have just acquired this DNA sample from Vincent Tabak, and it has been sent off to a lab to be tested against every piece of evidence that they collected. Meanwhile, as all of this was going on with Vincent, other police officers had been working with this UK TV show called Crime Watch. It used to be like a news channel that was on, was it every day? And they would just talk about crime across the country, like missing people, wanted people. I don't think they do it anymore. But they were planning to run a segment about the night that Joanna disappeared, the night that she was murdered. They were going to kind of reconstruct her steps with a lookalike and video it all, her going to all these different shops in hopes that it would jog someone's memory that might have seen her that night. This reconstruction was done, it was fully edited, and it was due to air on January 26th. However, it never got a chance to air because on January 20th, 6 days earlier, police had the breakthrough that they were waiting for. The DNA results came back and Vincent Tabak's DNA was found on several pieces of evidence. However, these samples were so small that specialists couldn't say whether it was saliva or semen or just from touch, like, you know, sweat glands and stuff. They didn't know what it was, but they knew that it was a 1 in a billion chance. 1 in a million? 1 in a million chance. Not billion, million, that it wasn't Vincent Tabak. So it was. His DNA was found on the backs of her knees on her jeans, suggesting that he probably carried her like this and like her legs had been draping over his arm like that, which, you know, is consistent with how you would probably carry a body to your car and out of your car. I can't imagine an easier way to do that, like a fully grown woman. I don't really want to imagine it. But that is how police believe he carried her to and from his car. They also, on Joanna's clothes, found a bunch of fibres from his coat and his car. So on the morning of January 20th, 2011, police arrived at the flat of Vincent Tabak and arrested him on suspicion of the murder of Joanna Yeates. So he was taken to the police station for questioning while his flat was forensically searched. A bunch of his belongings were seized, computers, phones, everything like that. Meanwhile, in Holland, back where his family and friends are, there was, I don't want to say outrage, but no one believed it. They knew that police had messed up once in this investigation, arresting Christopher Jefferies, posting so much about it in the media and stuff when he was actually innocent. And so Vincent's family believed that he was innocent too, and police were just trying to pin this on anyone just to say that they solved it. And Christopher Jefferies himself defended Vincent Tabak, thinking that they were doing the same to him as what they'd done to Christopher. Obviously, he'd gone through it firsthand and he knew he was innocent that whole time, and he was watching this from the other side now. But when police looked through Vincent Tabak's laptop, the evidence only mounted against him. 6 days before Joanna's body was eventually found on Longwood Lane, Vincent Tabak had typed it in on Google Maps and looked at it on Street View. And that was 2 days after Joanna actually died, so it's believed that her body was there that same night. So this is 2 days after that. So perhaps that is someone that is paranoid that the body might be found. Police also found countless searches of Joanna Yeates and the Joanna Yeates case, updates, news, everything like that from when Vincent was staying so up to date with it while he was in Holland. There's a difference between staying up to date with a case of your murdered neighbour. Anyone would want to stay up to date with that. However, Vincent was searching this far too often for it to be a normal kind of interest, if that makes sense. On top of that, police also found a lot of violent pornography on Vincent's computer, which doesn't say he's guilty of anything. However, one of these particular scenes seemed to mirror the exact way that Joe's body was found. So the way that this woman's clothes in this pornographic film, the way her clothes were arranged and her body was laid, was the exact same way that Joe was found. So whether he did that consciously or subconsciously, and in many of these pornographic films, these women were choked and strangled, and it's just very eerie because Joanna was strangled to death. So it's unsure whether he did that all very consciously and he watched these films and wanted to kind of recreate them in real life but take it too far, or whether that was just like a subconscious thing, like he'd seen it before but he wasn't consciously reenacting it. Anyway, meanwhile back at the station, Vincent was being questioned. However, he decided to plead the fifth, which is where you answer no comment to every single question. Lawyers will often advise their clients to do this and answer no comment to every single question if they're scared that the client will incriminate themselves if they answer any questions. And let's be honest, at this point it was not looking good for Vincent Tabak. So, however, when people do go down this route, this kind of no comment route, they still have to write out a full written statement to say whether they're guilty or not guilty and their version of events. And so Vincent sat and wrote this written statement with his lawyer that said he had nothing to do with Joanna's murder. However, he did give police an alibi as to where he was on the night that Joanna was murdered. Before, he said he was home alone all night, but now he said that he went to the supermarket at around 10:30 that night. And he said he had both a receipt of the things that he bought in the supermarket and a text that he sent to his girlfriend Tanya to prove that he was there. So police checked the CCTV of this particular supermarket that Vincent said he went to, and he was there at 10:30 that night, but police weren't convinced he was innocent. So think of it like this. Vincent Tabak was a people flow analyst, which also deals with where to put CCTV cameras in buildings because they know where people are going to be at certain points, you know. So he knows exactly where the main CCTV cameras are in a supermarket, and that is in the kind of front entrance because you get everyone leaving and everyone coming in. If he did kill Joanna and then he was trying to give himself a fake alibi, he knows that he has to be caught on these cameras in the supermarket multiple times so that he can say, look, I was there. So at around 10:30 p.m. that night, Vincent Tabak walks into the supermarket and then he walks back out again for seemingly no reason, doesn't buy anything, absolutely nothing, and then he walks back in again. So he has made sure he's gone past that camera 3 times. But for what reason? He then went and bought 3 items from this shop and then positioned himself right in front of one of those main cameras so that he could text Tanya, letting her know that he had just gone to the supermarket. So now when he says to police, oh, I stopped in the main entrance to text Tanya, you'll probably get me on CCTV doing that. Of course, they did get him doing that, but it all just seems too perfect. And also, this was an hour and a half after Joanna was believed to have gotten home and been killed. So that's plenty of time for him to kill Joanna, dispose of her body, and then go to the supermarket. So yes, he was caught in the supermarket, but he could have also done both things that night. It just seemed like he was really overdoing it with the cameras. Like, kind of when you're lying and you get overly defensive, it's kind of like that, but with cameras. Does that make sense? That was a really bad analogy. He didn't need to stop under that camera to text someone. When do you ever stop in the main entrance of a supermarket to reply to a text? If you're going back to your car, you would just wait until you got back to your car so you could sit down and reply to it, or wait until you get home to reply to it. When do you ever make sure that you stop in the entrance of a supermarket? Especially to text your girlfriend who is at a party, might I add. She's at a work party. Why would you randomly text her? This wasn't part of a conversation. He just randomly texted her to let her know that he had gone to the supermarket, and then he was like, have a good night, or something like that. When do people ever do that? But if all that wasn't enough, the absolute slam dunk piece of evidence that police found right after that was when they seized Vincent's car and found Joanna's blood in the boot. So this is police's theory as to what happened that night, because Vincent has never admitted the exact sequence of events. So police have just kind of pieced together the night, and this is what they think happened. They believe that Joanna returned home safely. She got inside the flat and whatever. She put her coat down, put the pizza down, and within minutes of her walking in the door, Vincent also walked in before she had a chance to lock it behind her. They believe that he pinned her down by her wrists. Vincent was over a foot taller than Joanna, by the way, so this would have been quite easy for him to overpower her. They believe that he just pinned her down by her wrists and then began strangling her. They don't know for what reason. They believe it has some kind of sexual motive to it, whether he intended to rape her or sexually assault her, but then decided not to go through with it, or whether he just wanted to kill a woman just for the satisfaction of it. I don't know. But yeah, throughout this whole ordeal, this whole attack, Joanna sustained 43 separate injuries to her head, her torso, arms, neck, mostly like bruises and cuts and scratches and things, but also a fractured nose. And like I said earlier, pathologists could tell by the marks on her neck, like how light they were, that this had been a gradual, slow, painful death. Police then theorised that Vincent carried Joanna's body to his car, put her in the boot, locked his car, and then ran back to her flat and just made sure that nothing was amiss, that nothing was knocked over, and that the door was shut behind him. They then believed that he drove to the supermarket with Joanna still in his car, parked the car, and then walked in and out and in again to make sure that he was caught on CCTV. He bought a couple of items to make sure he had a receipt, and then he walked back out again, sent that text in the main entrance of the supermarket, and then went back to his car that had a dead body in it. They then believe that he drove to Longwood Lane and dumped Joanna's body next to a quarry, and then just drove home like nothing ever happened. Later picked up his girlfriend Tanya from this party and just acted like everything was normal. On January 22nd, 2 days after he was originally arrested, Vincent Tabak was charged with the murder of Joanna Yeates, although he still maintained his innocence. And back in Holland, all of his friends and family were saying the same thing, that he was innocent and that police were trying to set him up just because they'd done a rubbish job so far. They just needed someone, anyone to pin it on, and Vincent was just unlucky and he happened to be the one. And so his friends and family back in Holland were actually fundraising and getting money together to pay for his court expenses in the UK. While Vincent was in police custody, like awaiting his trial, awaiting his sentence and everything, he was actually put on suicide watch and moved prisons for his own safety because police felt like he needed monitoring 24/7. For weeks, Vincent maintained that obviously he was innocent and that the DNA that they'd found on Joanna and the DNA of Joanna's that they'd found in his car was all set up and put there. It was fake, and it was all done by corrupt police officers. But 3 weeks after Vincent was arrested and he was being held in police custody, he decided to go and talk to the prison chaplain, which is kind of like a religious figure in the prison that inmates can go and talk to. It's kind of like a prison priest or something like that. I don't know. Pretend I didn't say that. I don't know what I'm talking about well enough. It's just kind of the religious figure that people can go and talk to about things. And it was there where Vincent Tabak confessed to this prison chaplain that he killed Joanna Yeates and that he was going to plead guilty in his trial. Notice I said that he confessed to killing her, not murdering her. And that was a very clever trick he pulled, because Vincent's laptop search history from the week after Joanna's murder revealed that he had been searching the difference between manslaughter and murder and the difference in trials, sentences between them, how long you would get for each thing. Manslaughter, of course, is when someone dies at your hands but you didn't intend to kill them. So maybe you're having a fight and the other person dies, but you weren't meaning to kill them, you were just meaning to harm them. And murder, of course, is taking someone's life with intent, like when you shoot someone in the head, you mean to kill them doing that. So Vincent kind of knew at this point that he wasn't going to fully get away with this. So now he decided to try and get away with a lesser sentence by saying that he did kill Joanna, but he didn't mean to. And that's exactly what he did. On May 5th, 2011, Vincent Tabak stood up in court and pled guilty to manslaughter. So his version of events goes like this. He said that he walked past her flat because they were on the outside of the building. So he was walking down the side of the building, he was about to go out, and that was when he saw Jo in her kitchen window, and she waved to him and then kind of like beckoned for him to come inside, like come to the door. Like I said, the two of them had never met before. So Vincent said that the two of them had a kind of like get to know each other conversation in the kitchen for 10 minutes. And then Joanna started getting a little bit flirtatious. And Vincent said that he took Joanna's flirtatious comments to mean that she wanted to get with him, and so he leaned in and tried to kiss her. He then says that Joanna took this the wrong way and she didn't want to kiss him, and she was really offended by this interaction, and so she started screaming. So Vincent said he put his hand over her mouth to stop her from screaming, and he was trying to like calm her down and say like stop screaming, and then when he took his hand away, she started screaming again, and so that is when he pinned her down and tried to cover her mouth again, but accidentally strangled her. This story just does not make sense. Who accidentally strangles someone and pins them down when they're trying to quiet them? And Joanna would not be screaming if it was as innocent as Vincent claims it was. If he'd just leaned over for a kiss just during conversation, she wouldn't have started screaming. So if she did scream, it's because he did something to scare her. Anyway, after 2.5 days of deliberation, and that is a very long time for a jury to be deliberating, by the way. After 2.5 days, the jury came back from deliberation and rejected Vincent Tabak's plea of guilty to manslaughter, and they said that he was in fact guilty of murder. And I am still rather confused that that was not a majority decision. So there was 10 that thought he was guilty and 2 that thought he was innocent. I just want to meet those 2 people. Vincent Tabak was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years, but it's very unlikely that he will ever be out because police believe, and the judge believed, that this was probably going to be the start of a serial killer had he not been caught. Now, during this investigation, just kind of a little side note to kind of end the video off, I said that far too excited for what it actually is. It's actually disgusting. As police were going through Vincent Tabak's laptop, they actually found over 100 indecent images of children. I'm not too sure why he wasn't put on trial for that at the time, like when he was put on trial for murder. I don't know why they didn't do the same, both of them at the same time. Anyway, he was eventually put on trial for that, for those images, and he was given a further 10 months in prison. Although that was pretty much just for the principle of it. They just wanted to like be seen to trial him and everything, because he'll never be out of prison anyway. 10 months doesn't matter, but it's just the point of taking him to court to find him guilty of that. So that's that for this case. Thank you so much for watching, and as for today's charity shout out, we have our first channel member suggested charity shout out. Of course not all of them are going to be channel member ones, but I'm going to start taking a couple from my channel members because, you know, why not? So thank you so much to the channel member named Kitty Cat, that's a cute name, for suggesting that we talk about OCD UK. OCD UK provide advice and information and support services for people in the UK suffering with obsessive compulsive disorder. Not only that, but they work to educate people on the disorder and work on how it is portrayed on TV and in the media and things like that, because OCD is often very trivialized in society. People are like, oh, I'm so OCD, when they just like a clean desk. And so when people actually have obsessive compulsive disorder, people think that it's this minor thing when it's not. Of course, it comes on a scale, and some people have it more severe than others. However, people like to self-diagnose OCD for some reason. Imagine my camera dies when I'm literally 2 sentences away from finishing the video. Thank you so much to my camera. But yeah, OCD UK have online forums and conferences and support groups, all for people with OCD to come together and kind of make friends and just talk to people that understand them and understand what they're going through, and maybe like get some advice off each other. I don't know, I've never been to one, but they sound good. They also run a helpline for people or for carers or for professionals like teachers or people that might need immediate advice. They also have like an email system for that same reason. So yeah, if you would like to donate to OCD UK, as always, the link will be down in the description. It would mean so much to the charity and to the people that the money benefits. Thank you so much to anyone that's ever donated to any of the charities that I talk about in these videos. I obviously talk about them for a reason, and that's because I want to make an impact. I want to, you know, what's the point in me having 600 and almost 30,000 subscribers? Mad, by the way, thank you so much. What's the point in me having that if I'm just gonna make YouTube videos, you know? Might as well help out charities and stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a big fat thumbs up. What the hell was that? Realistically, I know I do this a lot, but I've been sat in this chair for 9 hours now. 9 hours I've been filming this video. Not all of it was filming. I was having a lot of lighting problems, a lot of autofocus problems. Realistically, today's been such a slow day, but we've made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching. What was I even saying? Yeah, thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe down below if you want to see some more from me. A huge thank you to all of my channel members. All of the names are on screen right now. If you'd like to become a channel member, you can click the join button under the video if you're on a desktop, or if you can't find the join button, there'll be a link in the description. If you become a channel member, you'll get access to a bunch of extra perks. You get your name on this end screen at the end of all of my videos. You get access to a members only community tab where we talk about the cases. You can suggest cases for me to cover on my channel, and you get your suggestions fast tracked. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my second channel if you haven't already, because I will revive her very soon, hopefully. Oh hell, the circle isn't even there yet because I've spoke so long. Right, there it is. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!